What's the rush,
Wait.
We were just talking about Psytrance. I
God
wanted to
damn
capture it.
All right, I'm ready.
Are you ready, Dan? You ready, Dan?
You want me to start recording now?
Yeah. 3,
2,
2.
1.
Recording.
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 There we go.
Yeah.
I'm
Recording.
using Logic to record instead of Audacity this time.
Oh.
Is that better?
Oh, damn.
Yeah, it is. It is. I
That's a
think
step
it is.
up.
I don't fucking know.
Dope. Here, no, let me stop and listen to this. Just I don't want to fuck this up. Hold on.
That's
All right.
Ah, Dan, you fucked it up.
That's all right. The editor can fix that.
Who's that?
All right. Speaking of the editor, I want to try to keep everything. We've been doing pretty good about.
All right. Yeah, it appears to be fine. I'm sorry.
Okay,
That's what you
great.
do
All right, hold
after
on.
we talk.
That's gonna be on the podcast. Dan listening to himself.
Recording. All right.
Recording.
Here we are.
Okay. Anyways,
All right.
yeah.
Okay.
What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say we've been pretty good about it, but just not fidgeting too much when we're not talking or trying to have minimal background noise, because then I don't really have to edit. It's kind of
Yeah.
nice.
I always used to just mute my mic.
Yeah.
I'm in a squeaky ass chair, and that is by design.
That is smart. That's great.
That is by design. You said.
Yeah, I do. I live an intentional life these days. It's kind of this new thing I'm into.
You ever heard of minimalism?
That's basically me. I did turn my phone on Do Not Disturb. That's pretty professional.
Oh shit!
Wow.
I'm gonna do that too.
I'm not.
I'm not.
Yeah,
I
me
don't give a
neither.
fuck.
Just to be oppositional.
That wouldn't
Dan.
disturb me.
We're in the opposition camp.
No, that's the point of turning Do Not Disturb on, is that nobody will disturb me.
Okay.
All right.
Editor?
Mark
The
that.
editor is dead, man. There's no editor.
No editor. We just fucking post it live.
The
Are we
death of
live?
editor.
We're on, man. We're on. People can hear us. So
So we should probably talk about which book we're doing this time.
yeah.
We should actually first direct people to our iTunes and leave us a rating and review.
Yeah.
Podbean.
Yes.
This podcast is brought to you by Podbean.
Fuck you guys. Podbean is the best.
Podbean or die, man.
I'm going to be in Podbean camp. We can fight about Podbean on this podcast all you want.
I honestly think Podbean is probably where all the internet's going to end up in about 4 or 5 years. You can mark my words
It's
on
like
that.
Google.
Right, yeah, they're going to be one of the major internet companies.
Google's going to go to the way of like Ask Jeeves and Yahoo Answers, and we're pretty much going to do everything on Podbean.
When did the American Revolution happen? I don't know. Let me Podbean that.
Podbean that.
Oh dear. Okay.
I do have the new Podbean product. It's kind of like Alexa, but it's Bathinda. She is not helpful.
But then,
but no, the first thing we could do, like we always do at each and every episode, is introduce ourselves. Hello, I'm Cooper Malin.
From?
Oh yeah, I'm in beautiful Dixon, Montana.
anybody remember the rule?
Yeah. Alphabetical, right?
Oh, did I break that?
No,
you
no.
did it.
Oh,
You
okay.
did it. Who can figure out the next letter?
That'll be Eric. E?
Daniel!
It's early in
Oh
Bangkok,
my
yo.
god. This is
It
it's a
is.
book
It
club
is.
podcast and we can't even get out the alphabet right.
Well, yeah, basically, yeah.
That's all right, Dan. But go ahead. Introduce yourself.
I thought this was gonna be easier.
Yeah, yeah, this is Dan. I'm in the outskirts of Bangkok in the early AM.
This is
Outskirts
Eric.
of Bangkok.
Yeah.
Is that where your
Robin
partner is?
Yep. Robin Truck on my bed. Represent.
Hell yeah.
This is Eric in Eugene, Oregon, Pacific Northwest.
B&W, what up?
Track City.
It's Tracktown. God damn it!
Track City? Oh, is it
Oh,
Jordan?
whoa! Look who just showed up.
Oh, that's good timing, Jordan.
Perfect in time for
Except-
the intro.
It's like a
Yeah, that's
freaking
alphabetical
Pokemon.
order, too.
Right.
Are you
He was
recording?
next on the list.
Jordan?
Not yet.
Oh.
I want and say this is Jordan in Brooklyn, New York. Hold on, sorry.
Oh, God. We're just going to wait for you.
This is sultry.
So that's the word. All right.
This is just the anticipation we're building up for the main event.
Oh,
I hope
yeah.
this isn't gonna fuck up. I can just start recording, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do it.
Okay. Well, hold on. It's unloading Audacity. So
Oh, Jesus.
I'm
have to
looking on our
install
iTunes
it.
right
No.
now, and we have 5 ratings. 3 people wrote ratings, and I'm pretty sure 2 of them are hosts of this podcast.
Shut up, Coop, shut up. God damn it. Yeah, actually, you should read yours, Coop, because yours is good.
I didn't leave one. I'm not.
Oh, God. I thought you left one.
I don't want to call anybody out, but just reading them, I'm like, guys, this feels like it's one of us.
No. That
No
would be
shade.
ridiculous.
I love it, but I have my detective hat on.
Maybe we've reached
I-
the kindred soul.
Somebody
I'm
did
good.
give us
I'm
a
ready.
3-star rating, which I guess is okay. It makes me feel weird that they were just kind of like lukewarm about it.
Yeah, fuck them. Fuck
Like,
you,
it was just-
3-star reviewer.
Like, you'd rather have them hate it than just, like, kind of, like, be okay with it?
I want a 1-star
Yeah.
or 5-star.
Right.
Okay. Anyways, Jordan, you want to...
This is in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh,
Hell yeah.
all low voiced and shit.
Damn.
All right, and I'm rounding it out here. I'm Phil Griffin in Billings, Montana. Woo!
And this is
the
Waste Books. Guys, I thought we talked
Ah.
about we were going to do something like that.
Oh,
This is the Waste Books
Waste Books.
podcast.
Podcast.
Aye.
Radio Hour.
Oh,
The Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation.
that's who's sponsoring this episode?
And viewers like you and Podbean.
Right.
all right. We made it
Let's get
through
into
the
the book.
introductions.
We did.
It's only getting longer, even though we did make it easier.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, it's only getting harder.
No, that was cool how Jordan swooped in, though. I like that.
Yeah.
We should try to plan that for each one. We'll have one of us swoop in randomly.
Yeah, one of us just comes in 10 minutes in.
Ooh, I can report a concern on our website.
Oh.
We don't have enough viewers. That's a concern.
iTunes.
Can we start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it, Phil. You're the captain of this shit.
All right.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
starting This time.
You know what I
Yeah.
want people to do real quick before we start? I want people to go and leave us a 5-star rating and then just
Or
fucking
a
tear us
1-star.
apart in the review.
Does
No, because we
everyone
need
have
that
their headphones
5-star to bump up our algorithm.
in? Yeah.
But then just tear us a new one in the review.
Yeah, just leave the 5 and then you could say whatever you want.
You have free reign to hurt all of our feelings.
Those metrics.
I am very sensitive.
Okay, so thanks, Cooper.
Guys, I'm just doing all I can out here. As the creator of Waste Division, I'm just out here working my ass off, trying to get us our little piece of heaven.
Oh, Captain. My captain.
Well, Cooper, this was supposed to be my show, but I kind of just want to give it to you, man. You should be
No.
the captain on this one.
I'm instantly scared. This is what you're
No,
going to
no.
me as the leader.
We've all been
I'm going to
waiting
talk
for
a big
Phil.
game. You're going to toss it to me, and I'm just going to squander it.
I personally want Phil to captain this, so
Oh, it's gonna be tough. Okay, so Sex at Dawn. Wow, what an interesting read.
Are you reading
Indeed.
off the script?
I have a teleprompter. So I've been thinking a lot about this book for a while. I guess I'm just really curious. Like, should I just do a little recap of it first, and then we do initial reactions, or? What?
Yeah, let's give the authors too.
Oh yeah, authors Christopher Ryan and Casilda Jetha. And
They're like a husband and wife. Are they anthropologists? Are they?
Yeah, she's kind of a doctor. She's done a lot of medical research and stuff, and then kind of anthro stuff. It sounds like from the book. And she's in Bali now, trying to get work, and he's just bouncing around with his podcast. Yeah. And he stops in Bali every now and then and does some recording over there, and goes back to LA. That's what's kind of cool about this book is the author's still alive and active as a kind of voice in the culture. Did you guys listen to any of his podcasts, perchance?
I watched the TED Talk, and I thought that was a good, brief little like snippet of him.
Yeah,
talking about stuff.
TED Talk is cool. So I think Peter Sagal on the back here of NPR says that this is he uses the word demolishes, and that's a word that occurred to me when I was reading this. Is how it seems to pretty completely try to demolish like a whole bunch of big pillars of modern life that we take for granted.
He hates Western civilization.
Thank you, Dan. We can look forward to more of that, I hope.
Yes, indeed.
And mostly just goes back. He's really interested in. I became kind of obsessed and realized how huge an idea it is about the agricultural revolution being very significant time in human history because it's the first time that humans had substantial property.
Right.
So his argument basically is that humans evolved as an animal over 100 or 200 or 300,000 years, pretty much on the African plain, and then made our way out from there. And that in 10,000 years ago, we had this agricultural revolution that changed everything. In the sense that, too, like if you think about it, it's almost impossible, I think, for us to really imagine a society without property, right? We kind of talked about this with Dispossessed, but that's like a kind of earth-shattering or view-shattering concept for us, I think. So anyway, his argument is that in the last 10,000 years, shit has gotten really weird and pretty artificial for humans because of the agricultural revolution. It was a kind of power to build capital like we never had before. Because before that, we would just follow the capital around in the form of livestock or crops that we could gather and forage for. So his argument is that we evolved in a certain capacity for a long time, and now we're thrust into these highly artificial circumstances. And one of those things is a conception of sex that seems pretty opposed to what you could argue we evolved in. So we evolved in a certain circumstance for a really long time, like 95 or 99% even, you could say, of our time on Earth. And then we were all of a sudden put into this certain culture. It ends up being a pretty substantial attack on monogamy, I think. And really just a general Western philosophy that undergirds a lot of our thinking, which is a kind of Hobbesian scarcity mindset view. And so he kind of just walks us through a bunch of stuff that makes us question kind of basic assumptions that we have. He compares us a lot to apes and bonobos in particular. He kind of wants to emphasize that bonobos are like just as close a relative of ours as chimps, and that was only more recently discovered. So the chimp science kind of made its way in, and chimps tend to be violent. He talks a little bit about Jane Goodall and rock and roll and orgasms and penises and a bunch of fun stuff. So I don't know. How's that for a little?
I think what struck me first when I was reading this book is that I had always understood this book to be a sort of demolishing of monogamy. but I was surprised. I don't know if I would put it that simply. I think
Yeah.
what he did, more importantly, was demolish what many people call our standard narrative of human sexuality.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I thought was vastly more fascinating than just this idea of being like monogamy is wrong.
Right.
Because that's not what he did. I think I found myself when I would talk about this book throughout the month of reading it, is people would be like, "Oh, isn't this like the book that says monogamy is not real?" I was like, "No, actually, it's a book that's like redefining
It just
our
complicates the whole
Victorian era of human sexuality that's based on almost no evidence.
Right.
In fact, it's a pretty like eclectic and varied history of human sexuality that is far longer than what we think of as monogamous pairing.
Yeah. Thank you for the correction with that. Yeah, I think that's a good one.
Just because it's scary. I think he just lays out a much more fascinating idea than just being like monogamy's like wrong. We should all fuck everybody.
And to be fair, he doesn't really say that until the end.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, he kind of it's kind of the message looming in the background. But,
right.
Yeah, he's kind of mum about it until the very end.
I also think it's important with this type of work because psychology, especially evolutionary psychology and anthropology, is always tricky, right? Those commonly have been used negatively in recent human history, and by that I mean like the past couple hundred years, like phrenology, the ideas of like slavery and classism and racism has always kind of been propped up by like evolutionary psychologists,
yes,
incorrectly. But I'm not saying this is like this happens here, but with anything, this book was written in 2007, which is at this point like over a decade ago.
Yeah.
I just think it's fascinating because you were right when he talks a lot about bonobos, and when I've taken several anthropology classes recently for college, and a huge part of our curriculum as far as like understanding early hominids is studying bonobos.
Oh, no kidding.
So that idea has definitely changed because I think he is really, and he's probably right in like struggling against an idea of which we only exclusively study chimpanzees as far as like looking at early hominid behavior through our closest relative and ignoring bonobos. But I think that's largely not true anymore.
Right.
I think
so. Let's talk about why bonobos are important.
Because they're another, for people who don't know, they're another species of apes. Yeah, they're a larger, the larger ape, which include chimpanzees, gorillas, gibbons, which is like a lesser ape, and then us and chimpanzees. I'm not sure if I said that. And they also live in like the Congo Basin, Congo River Basin, and they essentially, what did he say? Bonobos, chimpanzees, and humans kind of split off roughly the same time on our evolutionary track.
Yes, we all have a common ancestor.
Because that's huge to remember. I think when we think of evolution, I think a common thing I hear repeatedly is that like we evolved from apes, which is like goes against evolutionary science. Like evolution doesn't work. Like nothing alive today has evolved from anything else. That means to say like our ancestors aren't alive today. That's not how evolution works. Like we didn't evolve from chimpanzees. Chimpanzees and humans evolved from a common ancestor.
Right.
Which is like a whole separate species that we're incapable of fathoming.
Right.
It wasn't like humans just branched off from chimpanzees.
Yeah. No, we emerged alongside them, right?
Yeah.
Which is pretty fascinating. But yeah, he starts out the book talking about this, right? The introduction is called Another Well-Intentioned Inquisition.
Right.
And he opens up just by saying, forget what you've heard about human beings having descended from the apes. We didn't descend from apes. We are apes. Then he goes on to say why. Something that I thought was really fascinating about this, of course, in the introduction, he kind of just gives a whole sprawling or like kind of a quick like Reader's Digest version of what happens in the book. And he brings up porn, which has always been kind of fascinating to me because it seems like it's so huge and nobody really talks about it that much.
Pornography?
Yeah. He says worldwide they say pornography is reported to rake in anywhere from 57 billion to 100 billion annually in the United States. It generates more revenue than CBS, NBC, and ABC combined, and more than all professional football, baseball, and basketball franchises.
And,
Oh,
and
it's
to
incredible.
add to that really quickly, I
Yeah.
think porn was one of the first like things that happened with the internet. Like I think like
It was.
when the
It was-
internet
So people
was
were
invented
trying to
pretty
figure out
quickly,
how
it
to
went to
send
porn.
larger files. Try to send
Right,
pictures
right.
of naked women or naked things.
Or what I like too is if anybody remembers VHS, there was like a concurrent form of technology called Beta. What is it? Betamax,
Oh,
which was like similar to VHS's, though it was a little bit larger. And I don't remember this. I'm too young, but I remember VHS's. But I remember learning that why VHS's kind of reigned supreme is because Betamax as a company chose to not allow porn to be produced on their technology.
oh, really?
VHS did.
Huh.
And that
There
obviously
you go.
consumers
Huh.
going to choose the one that allows them to produce pornography.
Yeah.
Hell
I was
yeah.
even seeing somewhere today, and I know that like I wasn't able to verify any of the numbers. It's too hard to, but I've heard this number thrown out a couple of times. It's either 30% of all images on the internet are pornography,
Yeah.
or what I also hear concurrence with that is that 30% of the bandwidth used globally is for pornography.
Yeah.
Those numbers get thrown around, and I haven't seen any verification on them.
I've heard that like there are 100 porn episodes or 100 porn websites for every non-porn website or something like that.
It's wild. And again, it's funny to think of because 2007 is kind of a long time ago. That's 12 years ago. And so a lot has changed since then. I kept having to like remind myself of that, especially with how fast our technology has changed, does seem to be occurring at like a faster and faster rate.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think
now
there's
we have
even like an algorithm
smartphones
for that.
and
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
fuck yeah. I'm sure it's huger. Yeah.
Or think about it. Like I think YouTube came out in 2007.
Did it?
No, I think it was before
Yeah.
that.
No.
You know, because 2007 was like high school for us, and it was already out.
Sophomore year, baby.
2005.
Glory
No, wait.
years, Dan.
Yeah.
All right.
Bronx.
Let me reel it in here. Porn. What else? Yeah. Anything else about porn?
When was porn invented? Sorry.
Well, porn. I don't want people to think that porn is a huge part of this book because it's not.
No.
It is not like that.
But it does play into a cultural thing that we have, especially in America. Or like you hear about how Utah has the highest porn use or something.
Utah.
So there's like a great complex with it, you know.
Well, something that is different now than then when he wrote it is now we acknowledge that pornography addiction is a real thing. And we've found that not we, as in like I'm studying this as well, but I think there has been research done on kids, especially young men, who are suffering from ED and other forms of like sexual, I don't know, incompetencies because of their addiction to pornography.
Yeah.
So you're having like 16, 17, 18-year-old boys who like
Can't perform. Yeah. So yeah, it's a thing, and he kind of just points to it as a way to say, like, hey, there's this whole. Oh, he says there's no denying that we're a species with a sweet tooth for sex.
Right. That's because I think that's a fascinating point. I think we forget that because we live in such a sexualized age in this new West. You know, I feel like hookup culture is a really big thing. You know, obviously, like it's like common. It's like very common to just talk about like hookup apps and stuff. You know, like I feel like sexuality is pretty open, but I also don't think it's open enough. And it is like easy to forget that we as humans are like naturally super sexual beings.
Hypersexual, right? He talks about bonobos. I think there's one example.
And that's when bonobos get brought up to like help describe us, right?
Right. He said, and because he talks about how bonobos solve problems, right? If there's one tribe, I forget where exactly this is, but if there's one neighboring bonobo group that comes in contact with another one, they'll usually just like solve the run-in by just hanging out together and sometimes fucking or grooming each other. Yeah. Whereas like chimps more often are violent with each other. There's also a whole interesting discussion about chimps and our observations of them. Part of what I really like about this book is how it goes, and it basically does a lot of like philosophy of science, I think, in some ways, where it says like, hey, we have all this scientific evidence, but where did it come from?
Right.
And how does that affect how we interact with it, and how our scientific or our information base can observe new things, right? Like the common example is with like primate observation. A lot of people turn to primates to see how our nature is, right? That's kind of the idea here. And so they'll watch, and male observers will notice like more male attributes about like competition or fighting or violence, and female observers are more likely to observe like instances of cooperation and that sort of thing. And this is another interesting point. I was just talking to somebody about how like there wasn't a comprehensive study of the clitoris until 2005.
Yeah, the stuff about the clitoris in this book is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah,
and not like in like a little boy's way. Like
no, it's like, what the
baffling.
fuck? Yeah, like this guy, right? It had the medical guy who was doing an anatomy study. He's like, there seems to be a strange protuberance between like the legs. I'm like, I've discovered something, and it's like, dude, that's been there for like hundreds of thousands of years.
And it was actually
it's also
horrific.
A great joke.
And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but
yeah.
I remember he, like in the time of the like witch trials, women with bigger clits, they called it like the devil's teat,
right,
or something like that. So they ended up burning women at the stake with giant clits.
Well, I mean, yeah. Speaking of clits, because he talks about clitorectomies in this book, and according in 2007, what did it say? The World Health Organization said that anywhere from like 127 million women had undergone a clitorectomy or some form of like vaginal mutilation.
Yeah, not pretty. And then there's the whole stuff about masturbation and even circumcision as a way to keep us from masturbating. Which is
right. That was because part of him
Kellogg, right?
Kellogg and Graham, the guy who invented graham crackers. Yeah. Kellogg invented the cornflakes.
Bland cereal meant to keep you from masturbating.
Yes, because sugar would make you want to just beat off.
Like the bonobos with fruit, just fucking eat.
Reese's Puffs do something to me, guys.
Yeah, it's so funny to think back on. Again, just because like I am inherently fascinated by chimpanzees and bonobos. I'm constantly talking about bonobos, I feel like, because they also, one of the things they do what's called GG rubbing, genital to genital rubbing, where it's not necessarily sex, but it is a highly specialized form of like communication and like a compassionate move. And it happens from like females to females or males to male. They're like openly homosexual and heterosexual in these like GG rubbings, and it's just a like indication of like the closeness you have to other members of your group.
Yeah,
and I love that because it's just so interesting to think of if we had anything similar, or if it was just like if rather than like a nux or like a chest bump, like when we meet up after like,
your penis
for a while, we just whipped out our dicks and just like mashed them together real quick.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, dude. It's been a minute. Hey, you smell it. Is everything cool?
You guys don't do that already?
We're not in Oregon, man. We're not in liberal freaking hippie nanny school.
Right.
You guys aren't in Track City.
We're not neglecting our vaccines and rubbing our privates together.
Yeah.
You guys are progressive
over there.
Hey, easy.
We're pretty progressive out here.
Start vaccinating your kids, guys.
Please.
Yeah, please.
All right, let me bring us back here.
I mean, I'm not going to. That's just because I can't afford that shit. You know what I mean?
You're the worst. So he actually, it's interesting because in this book he outlines kind of what I've called the relationship escalator. I referenced it last episode, even I think.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you did.
And it's the standard narrative. We should read that first, actually. Readers acquainted with the recent literature on human sexuality. This is page 7, by the way. Readers acquainted with the recent literature on human sexuality will be familiar with what we call the standard narrative of human sexual evolution. Hereafter shortened to, quote, the standard narrative. It goes something like this. Boy meets girl. Oh, that's 1. 2, boy and girl assess one another's mate value from perspectives based upon their differing reproductive agendas / capacities. Bullet, he looks for signs of youth, fertility, health, absence of previous sexual experience, and likelihood of future sexual fidelity. In other words, his assessment is skewed toward finding a fertile, healthy young mate with many childbearing years ahead and no current children to drain his resources. She looks for signs of wealth, or at least prospects of future wealth, social status, physical health, and likelihood that he will stick around to protect and provide for his children. Her guy must be willing and able to provide materially for her, especially during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and their children, known as male parental investment. So this is kind of setting up what they're looking to kind of demolish.
Well, it's something to remember. They're like remind listeners too that like when you first hear that, it sounds so clinical, but if you step back, it is what we've been corn-fed since the very beginning. You know,
it's in Disney movies and
it's what people always constantly refer to, like, oh, you know, males are just looking for young, healthy virgins, and women are looking for men to have children with that they know can provide for them.
Yeah.
Clothes, food.
Yep. This is in every love song and every movie and most of all books.
Yeah.
And even and when you think of like what our ancestors, like that's just like the most common thing you say. Like when you think of early humans coming together, you're like, well, that's just how it is.
People are just so the last point. So I did point 1, boy meets girl. Point 2, boy and girl assess one another's mate value. And 3, boy gets girl, assuming they meet one another's criteria. They mate, forming a long-term pair bond, the fundamental condition of the human species, as famed author Desmond Morris put it. And there's a little more, but I'll leave it.
Well, because then he also talks some about like what they call like the Flintstoneizing of human sexuality, which is this idea of like men clubbing women, dragging them to the cave.
Right. Well, and that's something we see, right? And with the philosophy of science thing, one of the questions you ask is like, who did this research and what baggage did they have that they might have brought with the research? And we see this, right? He brings up Darwin, yep, and talks about how Darwin
was a prude.
Darwin was a fucking Victorian prude. Big surprise. And so,
also why they brought up Darwin is because they're able to attribute our first inklings of teaching or understanding this idea of the standard human narrative of sexuality back to the early 1900s when the ideas of evolution were just beginning.
Yeah.
Just to give context why he's going to Darwin and a couple of the others who helped formulate our concept of evolution. Though correct and revolutionary in that regards, they also helped foster some pretty idiotic ideas of human sexuality because of their Victorian era prudishness.
Yeah.
Well, and he also stated that there was a lot unknown about prehistory, like more primitive times at that point in history, compared to what we know more today.
Truth be told, like we
still
still
had little to go on.
I mean, that's what's always tricky about, like, at least for me, I always take a grain of salt whenever I'm reading a book that's trying to posit how early hominids were like, because there's no records of that. Not like how we used to, like how we mated or bonded or related to each other. It doesn't. It's not. They don't get fossilized.
Well, and they say that, right? They say we have a limited set of evidence to work with, and we have to kind of triangulate based on evolutionary evidence in our own bodies, and then also comparing it to similar animals.
Similar species close to us, like chimps and bonobos, and then also other tribes still active across the globe that is closely similar to what we imagine our early ancestors would have lived like.
Or might have been, right? That's part of the game here.
Could have.
Right. Part of the whole structure, I was thinking about kind of the tyranny of the structure of the standard narrative, which is that it's just not tolerant of anything outside of it to some extent. It just makes it into a witch to be burned. So part of what I feel like Chris Ryan and Casilda Jethler are doing here is just saying like, hey, we're not trying to say anything about this. We're saying that modern humans are already making huge assumptions about our past that have no base.
Right.
And that actually, if you look at it, it seems to go the other way. So maybe we should also think about that.
Right.
But part of it is just opening it up to say, like, is there another way to do this?
Totally.
Right? Or another way to think about this at all?
I was really surprised at how scientific this book was. Like,
Yeah.
very, very based in like what kind of observable scientific fact that they could actually like record and talk about. And I think that was really kind of refreshing because it like they had their opinions about it, obviously, and it built to the theme of what, you know, Christopher Ryan was getting at. But I felt like it was very objective in a lot of the things he was feeding us with, like studies on apes and human behavior over centuries.
Yeah. Well, and they even had really smart little bombs. Like I saw him setting up bombs on these pillars, sort of, like where they would just do really deep research into, like one time toward the end, kind of, they were talking about somebody who had used research to support a monogamous or pair bond worldview, but they had cited somebody for some of their important evidence who was actually more of the view that humans are non-monogamous. So like, even if you go into the science, you'll see people just like sort of jerry-rigging these arguments together that don't actually hang. So there's just inconsistencies everywhere, basically. And I don't know.
Interesting.
What did you guys think of this? Like, I kind of want to go back to that a little bit more. Like, just initial
I really want to hear
stuff.
from Cooper and Eric because you guys are in the family way.
Yeah.
So I want to hear how you men took this attack on family.
Honestly, I mean,
and our values.
There we go.
Well, first of all, I drew a bath, lit some candles.
You found your clitoris.
Drew a couple of pentagrams.
Ooh, some pentagrams.
Some witchiness.
So I thought I actually enjoyed it a lot. I listened to it on audiobook because I didn't have enough time to like sit and read this one. It was pretty long, and I actually enjoyed listening to it on audiobook. It was like this kind of material I think is really enjoyable to listen to through headphones, like while driving or doing, you know, housework or whatever. So I enjoyed it though, because I felt like I was saying it was very scientific or trying to be scientific in the way it went about explaining facts or like these different things that they've researched. Despite you were saying there's some inconsistencies, Phil, right? Mm-hmm. But I thought that for me, I understood from the beginning what his opinion was about this stuff, so it didn't bother me to read through and kind of like, I don't know, I feel like, you know, we all live on a spectrum of different likes and tastes, you know, no matter what we're talking about. So, you know, at this point in human history, we have the ability to choose to do more than we ever could.
Yeah.
So, you know, I enjoy reading about other opinions.
Mm-hmm. Did it challenge your shit or?
I mean, definitely. Like, I mean, I didn't know about a lot of like the traits between bonobos and chimpanzees and humans, and like observing the way that. Sorry, I'm high. The way that they behave in their societies and how a seemingly more primitive ape, you know, conducts its sexual business, or the way that they their groups like develop social contracts based around sex and stuff. I don't know. I felt like it challenged me a little bit, but it wasn't as it didn't necessarily, I don't know, shift my perspective majorly about anything.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Cool.
That's interesting that you said choice, because I feel the same way, and even before coming to this book, I have taken the time before to evaluate what it is exactly that I want in a relationship and what I think is important in a relationship.
Yeah.
Like I not for like lack of trying or desire for ease, but I've never thought of my relationships as like wanting it to adhere to what I think of as like normal human evolution. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's part of what this book is addressing is people like that. Like, I've never been like, well, I'm monogamous because that's how humans have evolved. I've always sort of looked at it as a choice, and recently, with the partner I have now, it is just the easiest, most fun choice I could make. It's really made me think of like just projecting to foreseeing potential problems, right? Because that's what he illustrates, or they illustrate constantly in the book, is this idea, you know, if I am to say that they are attacking monogamy in any way, it is just sort of applying the knowledge we have now and also looking at our current state of relationships and being like, well, we can easily look at a lot of problems that most Western couples have and then attribute them to evolutionary basis.
It makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It makes sense if we've evolved to be this certain way and now we're trying to fit in these boxes. So all the problems kind of now make sense.
Right.
So in that regards, it made me think ahead and just try to and think of how I could be a better partner and to address those early on. And cool. I think a huge part of any relationship is communication. And obviously that is not original, or I'm not the first one to say that.
No.
But this book especially made it true, where I was like, oh, that's very fascinating. If I'm going to take what they're positing in this book to be true, I'm not saying that I do, but if I am to, then what I'm going to take away from it, if I'm going to continue to be monogamous, is that I just need to be as open and honest with my partner as I can.
Yeah.
To make it easier. And so that's where I came away, and I'd come into it that way. And I certainly learned from this book. I'm not saying I didn't, but I'd already looked at monogamy as a choice that me and my partner actively make if that's what we want to do. And we should talk about it constantly. I think that's hugely important. This is just to not assume the status of relationship because of anything other than choices that you two are making, or you three or four or whoever.
Yeah.
6.
The idea of like basing anything on our human evolution just feels so dangerous to me. I don't know why I can't shake that, but like some of the worst people and the worst atrocities of history have been used, and like that's been the excuse for them to happen, right? And so I always am like careful of when people are like, well, I do this because evolutionarily that's what we've always done. And I'm like, oh, pump the brakes. I've heard this argument before in terrible ways.
I have a similar reaction because of the implications with our nature, right? Like this is all revolving around discussions about our nature, which makes me uncomfortable in general.
That makes me uncomfortable too, but I think it's just what makes me more uncomfortable. I love finding out some universal truths of human nature. What scares me is when I hear the word evolution used to describe or excuse behavior, is because that commonly has been used negatively.
Eugenics and shit.
Yeah, like used intentionally wrong. I'm not.
You guys just fear the natural superiority of the white man.
Whoa.
Wow.
Okay, guys. Okay.
Joking. That's a fucking joke. It's a joke.
That's a good joke.
But I mean, hey, one more of those and you're out of here, bud.
I know. I'm sorry.
I know.
You brought up like the leading perpetrators of this argument are these new white nationalists, right? They're not white supremacists anymore. They're not arguing for supremacy. They're arguing for ethno-states and all these like very scientific, evolutionarily based words. That always scare me, right? The idea that you can use evolution to excuse your abhorrent behavior always going to make me worry when I hear other people using evolution as an excuse for behavior.
Sure, but again, there's a big extent to which we're already using evolution to justify this fucking whack situation we're in.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Part of this is the idea that evolution is infinite progress, essentially.
Right.
People have the idea that to evolve.
I think progress is the wrong word there. I think evolution is just infinite change.
Well, that's the idea, but most people think of it as like we become more evolved. Like think of a company like talking about like we will evolve and adapt.
Right.
And they're talking about like advancing and becoming this like fancy new creature to evolve. But that's not really how like evolution works.
It's pretty sloppy, right?
It's sloppy as fuck, and it's just kind of whatever works, and then some whack shit happens in reproduction, and that works a little better on accident, and then like shit in the environment changes, and then like those adaptations are no longer like advantageous. So right, it's a constant exchange of living beings with their surroundings, and
according to mutations on their genetics.
Yeah. So it's all accidental, and it's not really getting better per se, because those circumstances could change anytime, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're not the top of the food chain anymore.
There's no evaluations like good or bad when it comes to evolution.
Right.
It's just a process of change.
Yeah, it just happens.
It's not better or worse, right?
Yeah, we're not somehow striving or going towards anything better.
Right.
We just are.
But so part of this is the idea that right now we are at the best point in human history. You hear that a lot. People say like, we're doing more than ever before, and we have this amazing technology and all this stuff. But also, if you zoom out,
like every TED Talk, it
just feels like Pangloss from Voltaire, right? Like
it's
possible time because it is.
Yeah. Exactly. And that ends up being the argument, right? Like it's all just circular arguing, where they say this is in our, like, we are this way because in our nature, and we are that's in our nature because we are this way, and it just becomes
well, to go on that and to go back to the book, that's a fantastic way, like, reminder that is exactly how we view, like, that's the lens we use to view history is from today's point, because he uses that to contend. And I'm so glad I was able to read an argument that broke these two down, because I still feel like in 2019 I hear these two names and they're somehow given like valid scientific credence, and it annoys the fuck out of me. And that's Thomas Malthus and Thomas Hobbes. I'm so glad he was able to tear those two down.
Fuck Hobbes.
Just like the incorrect evolutionary psychologists and economists that they were, you know, and a big part of breaking down their argument was saying, listen, how they described the human past was exactly what they were experiencing in their world today. You know, Thomas Hobbes was living in the first industrial revolution in England. Of course, it was crowded.
And the French Revolution. It was violent.
Yeah, like it was a terrible time. So he used that to then just look at the past and just invented what he wanted.
Yeah.
And same with Thomas Malthus, right? Like just invented his own form of math to describe the situation he saw around him based on nothing that was at all meaningful or absolute.
What is it? Mathis? How do you say it?
Malthus.
Yeah.
Malthus. Was this the one that was about like agriculture, like how we can only add by arithmetic to our agriculture, and our population multiplies by like exponential?
Right. He just
linear growth.
Poverty is a natural extension of population
and civilization.
Right? Yeah, right.
Like there's nothing we could do about it. It is just like
justifies it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, so there's a bunch of shit, but Hobbesian worldview seems to be in a lot of our stuff, right? Like if you look at how we think about everything, it's there pretty much.
Well, it's just the postmodernist sad boys like masturbatory like pleasure dome. It feels like every postmodernist like dude we've read seems to relish in this idea that human history and what we're doomed for is Hobbesian's famous quote, or Thomas Hobbes' famous quote, which is humans are nothing but like nasty, brutish, poor, and like with short lives. And it feels like that is just like the postmodernist answer to this idea that there is no meaning in this world. And isn't it fun if we imagine that we're in the most terrible possible, version of everything?
Right. Oh, that's interesting, Cooper. I hadn't really thought about that.
I love reading it, but I also like have to acknowledge that it is just emo boys grown old and then giving a platform.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because they end up just reinforcing the whole attitude, right? Of just being like, oh, well.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. I kind of want to return to the book a little bit more materially here. It's kind of nice. It's interesting with reading a nonfiction book because it's sort of laid out in a way that's supposed to be understandable. And so there's this nice table of contents I can just kind of look at.
Yeah, because
he's very useful.
His argument and having to give like evidence and counter other arguments. I will say right off the bat, or however long we're in this podcast, how long are you able to say right off the bat? When's like the statute of limitations on something right off the bat?
I don't know. We'll have to look that up.
But this is a super comprehensible and easily read book, which is I will always like applaud for something that is dealing with science, right? I don't think I'm like assuming here by saying the general population is not necessarily big on reading scientific texts, like nonfiction science-based texts. I'd like to see that like change in the future, but I just don't think most people reach for this.
Totally.
Comes to like what they want to read when they get the time to read, you know.
I thought it was kind of refreshing based on like our current
Totally.
last few selections. It's such a switch up.
I really wanted to talk. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I think it was very well written. Like like you guys said, a lot of stuff that's written about science, even if it's just popular science, it's there's not really a lot of humor involved. It's a lot of terminology. It's written for a specific audience in mind, and this was for the lay reader. I mean, pretty wonderfully written.
Yeah.
Super accessible and also
accessible, entertaining, funny.
Yeah, totally. And assumed a level of an intelligence for the reader that is like refreshing. When you read a lot of these books, it almost is. It feels like you truly are the layperson, and it's like Philosopher King is stepping down to like bequeath you with knowledge.
Thank you, King.
Let me put it into terms you can understand, citizen.
Exactly. This book
it doesn't feel like that at all.
Tone. No, it had like a very inviting and like easy
chatty.
flow.
Yeah.
Like, hey there, brother.
He's like that too. He's just kind of a like,
hey there, little
hippie bro.
Hey there, brother.
Intellectual. He's just like fucking Rex from Napoleon Dynamite.
Hey there, brother. You ever seen bonobos rub their genitals together?
I don't know. This new move, brother.
I can't watch YouTube after 9.
So let's talk about.
I wanted to talk really fast about
please.
Darwin and where he came from. It is said that Darwin's mother, I think,
his mother,
used to go around the property and gather up these mushrooms that looked like penises.
Yeah.
And would like very secretively burn them in the basement.
Was it his mother
or his grandmother? It was one of the two. So he was just like raised in that sort of place where, and it's also really funny to think about like this woman sort of getting off on dealing with all these penis-shaped things and then burn like yes, man, yes, man.
Well, just the idea that like he would see that penis-shaped mushroom and like it just would cause him to like implode.
I found it. I actually found the passage.
Can you? Oh, you did. I was looking for it.
It's his eldest daughter.
She's the one who's recounting it, isn't it?
Hold on. No. It was talking about her. She did do that stuff, but it also said Eddie's prim enthusiasm for stamping out anything sexual wasn't limited to the written word. She waged a bizarre little war against the so-called stinkhorn mushroom that still pops up in the woods around the Darwin estate. Apparently, the similarity of the mushroom to the human penis was a bit much for poor Eddie. As her niece recalled years later, Aunt Eddie, armed with a basket and a pointed stick and wearing a special hunting cloak and gloves, would set out in search of the mushrooms. At the end of the day, Aunt Eddie burned them in the deepest secrecy on the drawing room fire with the door locked because of the morals of the maids.
The maids shan't see my harvest.
Well, we also must remember when it comes to Darwin and sexuality that he married his first cousin, who I believe was like 13.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah,
that's a bit disturbing, right?
Like one of those guys.
He was one of those guys, exactly. We have
Woody Allen type.
Yeah. I didn't want to say it, but that was bag now.
Yeah, 13.
Yeah, that's weird.
Let's talk about the sexual differences between apes.
Okay, Dan, you want to do it? Lead us off.
I just had the picture in my book where it compares the different penis size.
Just to give context too. So a big part of the argument in saying why we are in fact are polygynous when it comes to
Or
sexuality based on our
promiscuous.
evolutionary body is, yes, promiscuous is the word they use, is
in a
that
neutral sense.
yeah,
Right.
not like not in the contemporary sense
Slutty.
that we would know, just in a super neutral
Well, it's like if you
scientific.
look at the different, if you look at the average height and average penis size of different apes, and if you look at their sexual behaviors, you see a lot of correlations, right?
Yeah.
Well,
And of
not
course,
just that, but also how we compete and how we think of procreation, or how
Yeah.
we do sexual procreation. Because like gorillas
right.
aren't monogamous, but what they do practice is a form of competition in which their physicality wins them their mates. Whereas
men win the
and
female,
they live in harem
or the males.
society. And what I love is that they talk about historically through science. Polyamory was never considered, but Western male scientists thought, oh, maybe we're polygynous. Maybe we have a harem society is how we're supposed to live. And it's like that's such a male oriented way of looking at it, right? Because gorillas are polygynous, where it's a harem society, one male, many females. And yeah, you said like they have to compete a lot, so like their physical bulk is huge, but
over like 500
penis,
pounds,
right? But their penis is very, very small,
and they have little balls.
It is
Very
1
little
inch
balls.
when erect. 1 inch when erect, and their testicles are the size of kidney beans, and are kept inside of them at all times.
Yeah.
And what is it? Gibbons are one of the only truly monogamous mammals.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the only truly monogamous ape, and they are the males and the females are the same size. So let's go back to gorillas. For gorillas, the males are much bigger.
Yeah,
they have
2
the
to 3
kidney bean
times
balls.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the tiny penis. The gibbons, they're the exact same height, the males and the females, and the penises are like negligible, basically.
Right.
And I really want to go back to that chart. I lost it, but anyway. What was it? Chimps. I know the boys are bigger than the girls, and they have a pretty big.
Oh, here you
penis.
go. It's 224.
Okay, dope.
Just to specify the argument here is that we are not competing on physicality. We're actually waging on a sperm level.
Yeah.
Sexual war.
Our sperm is what is competing to pass on our genes for
right.
What's it? Not finesse. What's the evolutionary term? Anyways, to pass on our genes. So their argument here is that humans like bonobos and like apes practice promiscuity, and we can tell that because of our female to male body sizes, as well as the evolutionary growth and development of the male penis and the female vagina and the testicles, and how it shows that it is in fact our sperm that is doing the competition and not us physically.
Because we've developed big balls, and bonobos developed even bigger balls, and chimps too, I think. And so the idea there is that we
see on the chart.
Right.
Big balls.
Big balls. So the idea there is that we've put our evolutionary energy into making, I've heard testicular or genital tissue as described as like expensive to produce on an evolutionary in an evolutionary sense. Mm-hmm. So instead of developing big bodies evolutionarily, we've developed big balls and big dicks. And that's because that's where our main game comes in. The gorilla just fights, doesn't have to worry about anybody else's sperm getting in there. So he just like puts his tiny little tic-tac dick in there, and then it's good.
Because I thought what was fascinating, so our testicles are larger in order to produce more millions of individual sperm, if not getting close to like billions of sperm. Mm-hmm. And also they've done some studies, and they found they say on average, we're gonna get super sexy on a biological level, but they say an average man spurts semen like 5 to 6 times. And they've done these studies where they found the first spurt of semen has these, the sperm themselves have these antibodies that like neutralize the vaginal
other sperm.
And well, that's the last. So the last spurt is
right.
Then they have these antigens that then neutralize other male sperm that's also in there.
Really?
So it's fascinating, like
the sperm
army.
change.
Yeah, there's different like pHs of our sperm, and like different sperm that have different, I think, like proteins and amino acids that do certain things within the vaginal canal in order to like help our other little swimmers along. And also the female vagina also has these mechanisms. They've even done some studies that have found that a woman's anatomy is able to a certain degree, choose based on microscopic like markers within the like orgasm that produces all these different hormones, and according to like the markers on the sperm, like
immunology, right?
Like fertilize the egg and who doesn't, right? They talk about that a little bit. So like both the male and penis, both the male penis and the female vagina are like cooperating on this really weird, strange level that we can like note and like record, whereas like our bodies are pretty much like physically the same, right? Males are typically a little bit bigger, but we're not like fighting for dominance with other males. It is like being chosen on this very strange.
I am, bro. I'm always looking.
You're not, Dan.
Somebody.
Right.
Yeah. So penises, that's always fun. Yep.
Well, and also the shape, like another thing that points to the promiscuity of human beings was, so we have the different types of sperm that do different things in the vagina, and the vagina can choose. And another thing was just the shape of the human penis is apparently
this is debunked, though.
Cooper just let. Well, the shape of the penis is apparently really human penis is pretty unique. Yeah. And one party says, I don't know if this is the part that was debunked, but if they're right that early humans are having a lot of sex with each other, like very promiscuous sex, it would make sense that what they talk about with the human penis actually is good at sucking out other men's sperm.
Yeah.
The shape of our head.
I think that's Memo was just telling me, Dan, that's not true, or that
really
some scientists come out that's not so true. But I don't know.
Okay,
were you able to?
It kind of makes sense. No, I didn't follow it.
Have you done any of your own personal research?
I just like to squeeze it and see.
Just until your knuckles go white. See what happens.
There, the cone. There's the cone, and then it cones.
Oh, God,
that's interesting because I've actually heard that they have done studies. They've like created like fake penises and fake vaginas in laboratories, and have been able to do these studies that demonstrate that there is some sort of like vacuum sealing going on with that.
Right.
Do you think Memo's going through some personal shit?
Very good. Very good. Okay, so I want to go back a little bit because there's a little bit more like foundations here from the beginning. One of them is the famously flaccid female libido. So part of the Victorian, it's kind of like more like dun dun dun.
Oh, fuck you, mine was better.
I think it's a little bit like dun dun dun.
You guys sound like superhero entries.
Dan, what do you got?
Dan.
Moving on.
All right. It's just like a dial tone.
Waste books where we make our own sound effects.
Wow. So the famously flaccid female libido comes from this Victorian worldview.
Where'd Jordan go?
Jordan's gone, man.
He's gone a long time ago, Dan.
Did
he just like didn't like what we were saying?
He said his Bluetooth shit died. He's just having all sorts of New York issues, it sounds like.
Holy shit.
I gotcha.
Yeah. Just tech.
Just tech.
Just some ratchet ass tech shit. Okay, so the famously flaccid female libido is part of this Victorian worldview that holds women to be prudish and kind of coy is the term that we use. And you see it even in Disney movies where it's like, no. And it's kind of fucked up. I've been thinking about the coy female being a pretty heavy part of a rapey view that we maybe naturally take in this culture. Which is that, like, when a woman says no, what she really means is like try harder.
Try harder,
Right.
yeah.
Right, which is totally fucked, but that
terrible.
seems to be like a kind of a normal thing. But anyway, this is part of, right, like a corset culture in Victorian times where like women were literally bound up like that, and I think that's a good metaphor for kind of how they're treated sexually too. And it turns out that it's infiltrated like our own culture a lot too.
Yeah.
Women,
High heels.
yeah.
Men wearing high heels.
But it's all wrong. It seems like it's all wrong. If you compare us to bonobos, in bonobo societies, or whatever the fuck you call bonobo group, the females have sex with everybody. They're like really sexual. Interestingly, Chris Ryan talks about how during this book, or because of this book, he has women like email him or whatever, and they'll say, "Hey, thanks so much for this book. It changed my life, blah, blah, blah. Also, I had to stop to masturbate every so often because I felt like really turned on, or like really liberated almost," which is interesting.
I read that as like the most fucking like macho shit ever. Where it's like, like I like this book, but there are some parts where I was like, eye roll, dude. Like, could you
Did he
imagine
say that in the book?
Could you imagine like saying or writing, like, when I was writing this book, women would write to me all the time saying that they were reading my work and would have to stop to masturbate because of my words.
Grocery store.
No,
I'm the liberator of women.
I see where you're coming from, but I think that just speaks to how cool the knowledge is, actually.
Oh, I know. It's one of those.
And he wasn't saying it like it totally does have that, but I don't think that you would say it without like good reason. You know,
people say insane shit all the time. Listen back to all of our episodes of Waste Books.
That's
on podbean.com. Or is it .gov
I
now?
understand where you're coming from, Phil. Yeah.
No, but I don't know. We probably Memo was like, "Do you guys have a girl on that episode?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "You need to."
Good.
He's probably right. We need
It's truly insane too to think about this idea of like how long it took for people to recognize female sexuality, when at any, like, they needed to do actual studies and like look up bonobos to find out what at any point they could have turned to their wife and been like, "Hey, you horny?"
Yeah,
she'd be like, "Yeah, sometimes." And you're like, "Tight, proven."
Wow,
science.
groundbreaking.
I asked them because it's super damaging, and a lot of the problems in recent, modern, and past history is based on this idea that women do not feel the same level of libidinousness that men do.
Yeah.
And it's insane. It's an insane fact to wrap your mind around, that people still believe that, like, that there is like a biological difference in how men and women want sex. It doesn't make sense, because what it sounds like, if you follow that argument out to its logical conclusion, which is bizarre because there is no logic behind it, but it really comes down to, like, you would then have to believe that men and women are somehow two separate species, like, who are competing with one another in order to, like, get what they want from procreation.
Yeah.
Well, and that is a super damaging and harmful idea to go through life, because it's just not true. Like, it's insane to think of, because we happen to be different sexes, we're somehow separate species.
I think it's definitely a lot of cultural propaganda based around religiosity.
Religion's a huge part. I mean, I think there is. I think just weak men fear female sexuality to such a degree they're willing to create religions that suppress them for it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right.
It's crazy. Create whole nation states to suppress this terrifying thing
ever. Well, that's what he points out, right? That's one of my favorite things that he does, is just like, hey, we say that, like, women are supposed to be coy, but we have all these measures to keep them from being, like, sexual, and it doesn't work. And he ends up extending that to, like, humans as a whole, to say, like, people, it's been against the rules to commit adultery, but people have been risking everything, right? Like, a politician that cheats on his wife can risk his whole career. And it's like, it just says like, why would you just do that for no reason? Like this, like this stuff doesn't work. Like we've been trying to keep people in these strictures, and they keep like going out, and we keep insisting that we're like naturally monogamous, and wondering like, why are we having such a problem like being monogamous? What's going on with marriage? But it's like, hey, if you consider that maybe like for most of our evolutionary lifetime, we probably didn't exist in a monogamous or a strictly monogamous setting anyway.
Right.
So maybe trying to get everybody into that system is part of the problem. You're just trying to fit a bunch of square pegs into a round hole, and not everybody's fucking round hole.
Right.
I think that's a very good point. And I think that's something that's even more evident nowadays with people being more open to alternative sexualities, or at the beginning of it.
Right.
And I think that's really important in those kind of things that you're talking about, Phil, that maybe some people don't want to be monogamous. I'm sorry.
Monogamous?
No, you're saying it right.
Yeah.
Menage a trois.
Monogamous.
Well,
monogamous.
I'm glad you said menage a trois, because one thing he talks about toward the end is porn, right? To bring it back to porn. Some of the most common porn,
Hell yeah.
A lot of people, right, like monogamy is part of the standard narrative, but if you look at the porn that people watch, typically, it's a lot of it is group sex, and it's not like a bunch of females on one dude. It's a bunch of dudes fucking a girl.
Right.
And cuckold porn is very hot, or not very, but very, very big. Very, very hot right now. I was going to say very hot right now.
No shame,
Freudian.
No kink shaming here, B.
No, Dan. You do you, baby. Safe. You do you.
Right.
What's funny about porn too, actually, just regular porn where it's a couple having sex.
Yeah.
Right.
You're
in the missionary position, staring each other in the eyes for the whole purpose of recreation.
No, but even with that, you're still watching other people have sex. You're know, you're not just watching a woman there. There's a man actually there that you're getting off on as he fucks a woman.
But people just like to consume whatever.
Oh.
Whether it's porn, not porn, food, not food, whatever.
That's
a lot
insightful, Eric.
A lot of the pornography arguments that he had towards the end kind of got lost on me, because I feel like I could have come up with so many other different cultural explanations for that. Like, not saying that I'm at all right or he's at all wrong, but I was like having fun with the mental gymnastics of, there's so many other arguments to say why it is popular for men to watch like gangbang scenes, other than like evolution to describe it.
Sure.
Like, we could definitely go like the darker path of like rape culture and the power play that some men have when they see something like that. So that was a little bit more far-fetched for me when he started to like prescribe our porn viewing pleasure based on how we evolved.
Right.
And I was like, it's kind of crazy to like, I'm listening to an argument in which a guy is saying we are on a connected satellite based like information sharing binary codes on these huge like computers made from mined precious metals to watch pornography filmed on like X amount of technology, and that's based on how I evolved over 90,000 years.
Yeah.
It's just hard for me to like wrap my mind around use of technology when it comes to
I more
evolution.
thought it was just funny reading about when he talked about cuckold porn. I could just imagine every monogamous male reading that book, assholes clenching.
Well, I had to go.
Absolutely not.
I had to stop and masturbate. And afterwards, I wrote an email to Christopher Ryan saying that. It felt so freeing.
Giving him the exact location of where I was reading this book.
I shared the link that I just watched. Guys, this is dead air. We have 4 of us. How do we have dead air?
Yeah. I don't know. I think
you guys were trying to write a joke for too long.
Sorry, Phil. Apologize.
Oh, there's a lot of Vonnegut quotes in here. He has some Vonnegut quotes and some Twain quotes.
Yeah.
Those are cool. I really like the one that goes. I think it's like an Oscar Wilde quote or something. Whenever I see a husband, I'm reminded of an orangutan trying to play the violin.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I thought that was like illuminating.
You know what I thought were really good parts were the parts about mother, like the fathers and mothers.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Concept of fatherhood and mother being
right.
a mother.
So this is something. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, I was going to say, it was very interesting them using different cultures and the way language plays a part in what father or mother means on a biological or just like a cultural term, and whether the biological term even matters to some cultures, and anything more than just like the reproductive phase.
Right. Which goes to just like a larger game that they play throughout, which is just to say, hey, we have a lot of cultural baggage in these terms, and we can't apply them across cultures and say that humans are, for example, universally monogamous.
Right.
Like, or that marriage is a fundamental aspect of human existence. Because if we look at that and we say, okay, what is marriage in India, or what is marriage to this hunter-gatherer tribe, it ends up taking all sorts of different forms and kind of just becomes so encompassing that it loses meaning and it no longer like holds.
It holds as far as we understand them.
Right, but not further.
Right, exactly. It stops there. It's being reminded that these are just cultural ideas.
Right.
And what we associate with them can be unique to our own experience and should not be applied or like prescribed beyond that. If there is evidence that it doesn't mean that, I thought it was very fascinating when he brought up that several tribes whose names escape me don't even have a language equivalent for virgin. Like they just don't have an understanding of what virginity means.
Mm-hmm.
Or why it would be important.
Right. I mean, they don't even like understand it.
It is stupid. Like it's the whole concept of virginity is stupid. It's like, okay, the first time I ate beef, right? Did we have a big ceremony? Is there this big cultural baggage around the first time that the flesh of a cow touched your lips? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like
it makes no sense unless seen through the lens of our like male-dominated Western
standard narrative.
The standard narrative where like a man looks for a woman who's like viable sexually, who can produce children for longer, and who hasn't had any previous sexual experience. For why, I have no idea.
So let me go back to fathers and mothers, because that ends up kind of bringing up that thing about philosophy of science and just like questioning our use of terms and stuff. So with mother and father, he talks about how before we had modern science, when there was kind of just folk science, people had theories that they made up about how women got pregnant because we didn't have fucking microscopes to see eggs and sperm, right?
Right.
Like they wouldn't even necessarily notice that it happened because of sex. Sometimes cultures thought it was because you just crossed a fire a certain way or something.
Right.
Which
I still believe.
It's true. The earth is flat and women get pregnant with fire. I just was listening to Alex Jones thing. That was pretty awesome. I checked that out, Dan. It was long as fuck, but
it's 4.5 hours. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's
amazing, dude. It's amazing.
Dark elves.
Yeah.
He's gone like religious, man. He's gone so religious, like talking about Satan and God warring. I honestly feel like it's because he's having to appeal to a narrower base since losing like 90% of his revenue from iTunes and other platforms dropping him.
Yeah. Okay, wait. I got way out of that.
I just want to talk about Alex Jones now.
I know. So
is Alex Jones Christopher Ryan? I'm typing that in right now.
He's Bill Hicks. So mothers. So part of this thing about conception, right, and being able to see sperm and egg, is that one culture came up with a theory that women are always pregnant, pretty much ever since they come of age, and that they pretty much always have a little egg or a little baby in them. And as they have sex with men, they gather what they call men's milk, and that men's milk feeds the baby, and the little baby grows. So at the end, you have a bunch of men having contributed to the growth of the baby. So part of that is that, like, you want to go get good milk. Like, if you want it to be a good musician, you go fuck the musician and get his milk. And if you want it to be a good, like, shaman, you go fuck the shaman. And you can get a bunch of these essences of the men in it, so that when it comes out, they just don't have a concept of there being a single father, which is another kind of like world-shattering thing for us to be like, oh wow, I'd never thought that there would be something like that. And so I like that, and it ends up kind of lending itself to this whole vision of the primal horde, or the primordial horde, which is just kind of the interconnected. And this stuff always makes me think of mycelium and like fungus growing, like, and how we connect in all these different directions.
Right.
You know, and it's not in these clean binary ways that modern life tends to try to put them into.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that I really like that stuff about folk science from before, because I like how it makes sense in a way. And they even talk about how it seems to promote like a more cooperative and like a better society for children, right? Where children can just run around and they're kind of considered everybody's children, because like
Children of the tribe, right?
Anybody that you've had sex with, you've potentially contributed to a child of theirs, right? So like, and that's what they talk about, right? Under the standard narrative, the males don't want to take care of offspring that aren't their own because it's expensive for their resources and it doesn't put their genes into the future. But the standard narrative puts too much, or seems to put too much emphasis on individuals getting their genes into the future instead of just humans getting human genes into the future.
Right.
So under this, you have, right, like tribes where kids just run around. I thought about this on sort of like a mechanical level, where if, you know, say fucking dad goes out on a hunt and like on the way back stops for like a smoke ceremony or something with a neighboring tribe and like hooks up with somebody, like all of a sudden dad has a little bit of a kid over in that village potentially, and like wouldn't want to fuck with that village because he might be fucking with his kid at some point. Or I like how this stuff, right, the basic argument here ends up being that sexuality is not procreational for us and is instead like a highly developed language that we use to connect with people and establish trusting relationships potentially pretty quickly, right? Like that's something you notice even after a quote one night stand. Like sometimes you can bond with somebody in a way where like if you're passing through town again, you could hit them up, right? And like so we see that today even. And that's kind of the power. And we, for a long time, we've been taught to be ashamed of ourselves for that,
right?
Or to suppress that instead of embracing it. And it seems to lead to a lot of frustrated people.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the Chinese group. There's a tribe in China called the Mosuo. I don't know. I feel bad because my coworker. She's been there. Like she lived in China for a while, and she pronounced their name correctly, and it's different than whatever I'm saying. But,
right.
Yeah.
It's like
anyway,
Swan or whatever.
Yeah, it's in the book. It's Mosuo. I'm looking at page like 126, 27, 28, 29. Their society is matriarchal.
Mosuo.
Yeah, something like that. But their society is like they don't have marriages. They're matriarchal.
Matriarchal.
Thank you. Yeah.
So their names and property is passed down according to like matrilineal lines.
Yeah, right. The women make the most of the decisions for the group, and they kind of have the keys to the kingdom, right? They don't really have long-term. Like, there's a quote. It seemed quite Chinese. Just listen to this. Imagine like Confucius or Sun Tzu saying something like this. Women and men should not marry, for love is like the seasons. It comes and goes. Right? That
I like that.
Yeah, but it's so they have a system, please correct me if I'm wrong, where like at night, like there's like a door, the way that their houses are set up, there's a door, an outside door to the woman's room. and like different men on different nights can go like shack up, and they don't really talk about it. Yeah, and they don't really talk about it. Like they don't really kiss and tell. It's just like, oh, if they like each other, they'll fuck for a few nights or, you know, however long they want to. But there's like no sweat when they're like, when that person stops coming over and someone else does. Like it's not really a thing. They don't see it in the same, they don't have the same like propertarian relationship to human human sexuality. Here, I want to read a little bit. This is on page 129. It says, particularly libidinous Mosuo women and men ashamedly report having had hundreds of relationships. Shame, from their perspective, would be the proper response to promises of or demands for fidelity. A vow of fidelity would be considered inappropriate, an attempt at negotiation or exchange. Openly expressed jealousy for the Mosuo is considered aggressive in its implied intrusion upon the sacred autonomy of another person, and is thus met with ridicule and shame.
That's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
So wait, just to be clear, it says particularly libidinous Mosuo women and men unashamedly report having had. I just heard you say shamedly, kind of, or ashamedly.
Oh, yeah. I think I meant, I'm sorry. Yep, I meant unashamedly.
No, so yeah, the whole point is that they think jealousy is bad. Like they think that you're...
It's that the thing inappropriate response.
Right. It's immature, kind of. It's like, hey...
Yeah, exactly.
You can't...
What I found fascinating is I'd bring examples like the Mosuo up to other people throughout the month of reading, and they would like usually react negatively, thinking it was like somehow strange or bizarre. And I like reminded them, I was like, I don't know, at least in my experience, that's sort of like what being an adolescent was like. Like maybe I'm just speaking too much in my own experience, but like, you know, if we want to like use the pop culture term now, like hookup culture is kind of this idea, right, of like unabashedly hooking up with friends and like doing it respectfully. And, you know, like I think people always would hear the term like, oh, there's like a door and men would sneak up to it at night. And I'm like, no, it's just like how your door was open to whoever you were like intimate with in that week or so, like, and it would be there and then it would fizzle and then you both would move on but remain friends and see each other in the same circles at different bars and be like, oh, hey, how's it going? How you doing?
Right.
I read it in that way, as opposed to, I think, like, when I would try to describe it, people would think of it as just this, like, strange sort of, like, at night, people just, like, sneak around and fuck everywhere.
And be like, hey, fucking come over tonight.
Well, and when people react in that way to these kind of systems, it tells a lot. It shows a lot about their weaknesses.
Right.
I think, right, or their vulnerabilities. Because even, just to bring it really quick back to the Mosuo, the Chinese government, like, had a thing where they like tried to convince them to live otherwise, like spent a lot of money and resources to get a very, very small minority to change the way that they're having sexual relations with each other.
They sent agents down there who would beat men that were caught sneaking around at night to go to different houses.
Yeah, it says they had like programs where they would show pictures of people with like in the far stages of syphilis and like try to relate that to their own practices.
Set up a theater to try to show the people propaganda about it, and
which is horrifying if you've never seen late stage syphilis victims. It is horrifying.
and then so it says, one more paragraph I'm going to read really quick. It says, when even these heavy-handed tactics failed to convince the Mosuo to abandon their system, government officials insisted on bringing, if not demonstrating, decency to the Mosuo. They cut off essential deliveries of seed grain and children's clothing. Finally, literally starved into submission, many of them agreed to participate in government-sponsored marriage ceremonies, where each was given a cup of tea, a cigarette, pieces of candy, and a paper certificate.
Jesus.
But it didn't really work.
Fucked up.
Yeah, but it didn't work.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the most like terrifying idea to like what small libertarianism I have in me. The idea of thinking of a government just like withholding food and resources to a small minority group of people just because of like minor cultural differences.
Right.
I mean, that's why we need the Second Amendment. You know what I'm saying?
Right, exactly.
We're all on the same page, brothers.
Yeah, brother.
You ever seen bonobos rub genitals together?
Yeah.
That, just to speak on like a larger like just to pull away from like trying to describe the book and just say like my own experience with it. I love this shit so much. Like I love ever since I was a little kid, I've loved looking at like other tribes. Like I just always had this curiosity and fascination with like Amazonian tribes. Yeah, deep Eastern cultures and different tribes throughout the world. And so one of like I had so much pleasure from reading the different little bios and write-ups that he would have on of a multitude of different tribes that have been studied throughout the decades across the planet. The Yanomami, the Muso we were talking about in China, and so many others. I loved it. I mean, that if you are into that, if you are into this idea of like taking a look at some of these more primitive tribes that are still thriving or not thriving, but still present on the globe, this book is so much fun, and it also creates like a really fun narrative that helps explain some of the feelings that like a lot of the stuff that he would talk about and argue. It kind of makes sense on like a base level,
for me it's a deep level too. Like part of why I love this book so much is it on the one hand it came at a really important time in my life, like at the end of a marriage and shit when I was trying to figure out what the fuck happened, but also like I've just been confused about like modern life for a really long time, and like why the fuck do we do this way? Or I came from a broken household, so I was like, what? Like, why are my parents like living in different places now? Or like, what is this? And now when I look back and I think it's like, oh, we are apes in cars and in marriages and like going to jobs. Like we are apes. And then we wonder why we have depression or why all these different problems seem to happen, you know, addiction or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, it makes sense if this thing that's supposed to be like out on the African plain and spent 95% of its existence as a species in that context, why it would be so cramped in a box in a car or in a house. And so I just felt my own anxieties be like kind of explained to be like, oh yeah, okay, I'm not fucking crazy. Like, well, I might be, but like, I'm not as crazy
not for
as
this
I
reason.
thought. Not for this reason, at least.
There's no way that like cities are natural. Like there's no way that.
Well, they're not. They wouldn't have existed before 10,000 years ago. Before we had the resources.
Nowadays is natural, guys. I mean, that's pretty obvious.
That's the point too. Yeah.
Well, I think for me, it's obvious to me that humans are not strictly monogamous beings because we're apes with hormones, and the idea of monogamy is definitely like a cultural thing. And so I think it was really interesting learning about like Cooper was saying, different tribes of people and how culturally we evolved in different areas of the world, and how that is in comparison to also like primitive great apes like bonobos and chimps who are so close to us.
And just to go off that really quick, so like we all have experience of the standard narrative, right? That's like we all grew up watching Disney. We all grew up with our parents telling us that this is what we do. You find one person to settle down with, you remain faithful to them, and you pass on lineage, continue the existence of the human race. But how common is infidelity? How many of you guys have been in relationships where you've either been cheated on or cheated? And how many people do you know? It's all the time, dude. And
everywhere.
I don't know. I remember in university, like almost every relationship, like someone cheats. And not my own. This isn't coming from experience. This is like noticing from like just friends' stories.
Yeah.
And everyone acts like it's like the biggest. Everyone's like, oh wow.
What the fuck,
that
yo?
That happened. So now when people tell me this, they're like, oh fuck, I cheated on my girlfriend. It's like the worst. I'm like, yeah, well, fuck, dude. Like everyone's doing it. Like everyone's doing it. Or like, oh, she cheated on me. It's like, yeah, that's what happens.
That's what people do. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so, like I don't know how no one like it's common. You hear it all the time.
Right. So
it's everywhere.
Here's the shit where it like lands for me. Around kind of the expectations of monogamy and how unreasonable they are in a lot of ways for like probably a lot of people. is that what Chris Ryan is saying is that, or Chris Ryan and Casilda's name is on here. He's the active one. She doesn't speak English that well. I don't think, or I don't know. I guess I need to do research on that, but it's kind of funny. I think some part of me thinks that he slapped her name on there in some way, like a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't notice any presence from her. If there was, I had no idea.
No
differentiation.
So I'm not sure about that, but poo poo poo.
Poo poo poo.
Poo poo poo. Relationship escalator. Oh, damn it. Oh, so he basically paints a picture of us. Here's my analogy. With monogamy, as a lot of people practice it, it says it's like you put a steak in front of a dog and you say, Mr. Dog, if you eat that steak, you will break my fucking heart. And then the dog does pretty well for a while because he doesn't want to break your heart and he has like some dog food over there. But then that dog is eventually going to eat that steak. Like it's in the dog's nature to fucking rip into that red meat and eat that steak. And like for you to base a contract on that with a dog seems pretty ridiculous. And that's like kind of maybe like a strong analogy, but I do think that there's a lot of truth with that.
That was actually a pretty good analogy. I feel like that was a good one.
Right, like, and that's part of, right, Cooper and I talked about the thing at the end with Phil, actually, who leaves his wife and kids he gets kicked out of the house basically after cheating on her. And it's this basically just the tragedy of an affair and how like people's families crumble and stuff. And what he ends up saying in this is that like people set their foundations on kind of ridiculous ideas.
Shaky
and then it's
ground.
It's no surprise. And then you get like fucking everything's broken when somebody steps out one time. And it's because of this whole romantic idea and the Puritan idea that we have to be devoted to each other and be soulmates or else it will break it. Or I don't know. There's a lot of stuff banging around with that, but Cooper, should we take a break? Or
I'll be right back if you guys want to keep talking.
I got the reference too.
I want to clarify just what I said a minute ago. When I was saying what I was saying about infidelity, I don't mean to sound like I'm condoning it. Like I'm not saying infidelity is a good thing. I'm just saying that it's extremely much more common than we would like to admit.
Well, I think
that's part of my point, though, right? I do have kind of a radical idea about this, Dan, which is that like I don't feel that bad for people that get cheated on because they made a deal with a dog not to eat a steak in some respect. So it's like, what do you expect? Like, and of course we have all this cultural stuff that says we should think a certain way, but if you start to look at this stuff, it's like changes everything basically.
Right. No, I agree. I agree with that completely.
I'm gonna get some water really fast.
Oh, okay. Well, Dan, it's just you and I now.
Yeah.
This is the segment of the podcast where Dan and I talk about the American Revolution.
Right. Yep.
No, I know what you're talking about, though, Dan. To comment on your point, I think a lot of it stems from how the grasp of religion has lessened in modern times, and people are kind of going away from organized religion, and the idea that
Cooper's
the idea of sexuality is not a obtainable or a what's the word I'm looking for? Dan, what's the word I'm looking for?
Oh God, it's early over here.
Just basically that the idea of like a religious, like Puritan, like love, like Phil was saying, is fading. What everybody should be striving for. When in reality, everybody has.
We don't have the shadow of an all-powerful God
right.
us to hell.
That's exactly right, Dan.
Everybody has different tastes too. So like our sexualities all vary slightly, even depending if you are into the same sex, different sexes, like group sex, whatever. Like everyone has slightly different tastes. So I think the importance is like people being able to communicate that.
Yeah.
And not be repressed, like you're saying, Phil, into like this idea of what they should be wanting.
Well, and now that it's opening up, there's whole languages that are popping up around it, like in the polyamory world. We're coming up with words to fill in gaps of like the old binary type language that was trying to keep things in certain boxes, and like it's just become more and more apparent that those boxes don't work.
Totally.
Oh, you said something. I forgot it.
Iceberg.
Something about an iceberg.
Yeah, something about iceberg. We hadn't gotten to that part yet, so if you guys want to talk about the iceberg now, that's fine. But yeah, I think I honestly I really enjoyed this book. Like I don't disagree with it. I like completely understand, especially on a biological level, a lot of the concepts he's talking about with human sexuality and the idea of being apes and sexual beings. Like a lot of the sections where he was talking about how much humans have sex or ejaculate, or the time that we have sex compared to like apes was crazy, because it's like
thousands of times,
astronomically more than the other apes
or animals in general. Actually,
yeah. Ape bonobos, they only can last for 7 seconds at a time.
Yeah.
And
it makes evolutionary sense.
Yeah,
right.
And like when that paired with their like the way that their culture, but the way that bonobo societies work, where they're very like sexually promiscuous in a very passive way. It makes sense with their sexual ability biologically.
Yeah.
But they also talked about how bonobos have deep loving relationships too.
They French
bonobos.
kiss even.
Right, and they stare into each other's eyes.
Yeah, they stare into each other's eyes. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And so I thought it was really cool the spectrum of chimpanzees and bonobos. How chimpanzees were definitely like the more hard, violent part of the spectrum, and the bonobos were like the more passive, very ultra casual side of the ape.
Yeah, so I want to jump in here really fast with the chimp thing, because it leads to an interesting discussion about civilization and agriculture. So, right, we mentioned that chimps are known as more violent animals, but even those observations are questionable. I don't know if you guys remember the part where they talk about Jane Goodall noticing the apes getting more aggressive as they were giving them the bananas.
Right, because... Yeah, there was something about the food. They did something with the food, and it made the chimps more aggressive.
Well, all of a sudden, right, so these researchers were trying to watch the apes, so they would put out boxes of bananas for the apes to have. So all of a sudden in the environment, instead of having bananas spread all over for apes to go and get, when they need it, you have a concentrated resource all of a sudden. And the apes started to act a lot like humans act with concentrated resources, which is to say warlike and possessive. That's an interesting aspect to think about too, that undermines the Hobbesian worldview, which is that humans, before agriculture, there just wasn't significant enough resources to fight over. Like, there wasn't a concentration enough that it would be worthwhile for you to go and potentially lose people in your party in a battle or something.
Right.
So whereas we're told that like prehistory was nasty, brutish, and short, and like Native Americans or whatever indigenous tribes like were raping each other all the time, chances are they didn't really have reason to. The views that we have of Native Americans around here in Montana is of Western Native Americans after the introduction of the horse, where they're riding around stealing horses and stuff. But even the horse is something that we didn't have in this place before Europeans came. And so that wouldn't have been like a resource that people were vying for.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know.
Totally.
The apes and the bananas. Yeah, so the chimpanzees, even that observation was skewed, right? It wasn't an objective observation, because they were changing the environment that the apes were in just by their presence and by offering them bananas to hang out. And so the apes all of a sudden had something to fight over, and so they saw them when they were fighting around this fucking pile of bananas.
Yeah, and the main thing I loved about this book, even if you disagree, like even if you're like, oh, well, my monogamous relationship is ordained in the eyes of the Lord, and all the rest. I think it's you could still learn a lot from this book in the sense that, like, science is supposed to be this objective thing, right? Like, supposed to be void of subjectivity, but like he keeps giving examples of how our cultural underpinnings keep getting thrown into the mix, right? Like,
Yep.
Darwin being a prude in a society where women are basically seen and not heard, and they're not sexual, but they're also wearing corsets.
Yep.
Right. And
exactly.
Yeah, and just like this thing with Jane Goodall and making the apes get more resource intensive.
It's not like science is a human activity, and as such is carried out by humans, and not just like neutral oracle orb things like floating around observing. Like we all have baggage when we look at the world,
right?
And this is just expanding that to a larger level, saying that our whole culture kind of has that.
There's no such thing as a perspective-free perspective.
Right. There's another interesting thing about our views of patriarchy and matriarchy in history, and how we might extrapolate about like whether or not we're more naturally matriarchal or patriarchal, is that like if members of a patriarchal society go out and look for signs of a matriarchal society, oftentimes they'll look for just a mirror image of the patriarchal society, right, just with women or females in places of power, right?
Which is not what's in evidence in matriarchal societies.
No, matriarchal societies have much different shapes, and power functions much differently. They're better usually,
right?
And so you can't bring the same framework and expect to see things and expect to see power signified in the same ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I really like all that stuff that just complicates the fuck out of that.
Yeah,
that stuff.
I think I might have to get it wrapped up here, guys.
That's cool. Let me see. Can I just look over the book really quick to see if we had any big ones?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I don't know it short, but
I wanted to talk about what I thought was fascinating. The invention of the vibrator.
Yes.
Do you guys remember that? So there was a whole disease, hysteria, that was basically, it was just sexually repressed human females that were not getting orgasm. Like think about like if you guys have ever been sexually frustrated, it's not a great feeling.
Right.
But so these women back in the day, they would come with these symptoms of this hysteria, this disease where it was basically just they were being sexually repressed, and they would have to go get, the doctors would induce orgasm in the women.
Yes.
Right? And that's why a man invented a vibrator, because he got tired. And
I love it, like big machines too.
Right, and the doctors like were not looking forward to it. Like,
that's some steampunk shit.
Right, it's like, oh, Mrs. Potts came in, and now we've got to fix this problem, and I've got to sit and I've got to play with her snatch for the next hour, or, you know, however long.
It reminds me of that one guy. It was a guy who bragged that he never fucked his wife. Never. He was the one. Was it just Kellogg? Maybe.
I think it might have been Kellogg.
So Kellogg got every morning he got an enema from a male orderly.
Yes.
Which is just amazing. And he never had sex with his wife, so it's like,
He'd brag about that.
Yep.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. So the other thing that we maybe missed is female copulatory vocalization. Right, which is this idea that women are just louder during sex, and how that seems to be it could be a signal for them saying like, "Hey,
I'm in the mood.
Shit going on over here, like, fucking, let's do it." And part of what I really love about this book is how much it flips thinking about women and the coy female, and really shows how powerful women are through their sexuality if it's allowed to be expressed.
Right.
Which is
when
part
there's
of
no shame attached to it.
Where there's no shame attached to it. Right, even with this multiple fathers strategy, you have women kind of hiding the card from men in some sense, even on a microscopic level, right? And they don't even realize they're doing it. And like where where the men don't know if it's their kid. Like all of a
Right.
sudden, this woman just has men like hanging around her because they may or may not have a kid, and like that's kind of dope. Like she ends up looking like a bad bitch, right? Like
Right.
just all these guys wanting to be around. So I just like this part of that thing. There's a paragraph in here. I don't know where it is, but it says about how it seems like when agriculture popped up, it seemed to lend itself to like patriarchal power dynamics with like once there was resources that were worth fighting over, the more aggressive or like possessive aspects in men probably like put men into positions where they had more power, right? And then women didn't have the ability to just go collect fucking berries. Like a lot of forager societies, women provide more of the calorie intake for the tribe than the men do because they're providing staples like berries and shit that the tribe eats when they don't have meat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to think about how agriculture could have been a mechanism that popped up and led to huge power and differences with men and women or males and females, because before that, yeah, I mean, a woman would have a baby and like her family would just help her take care of it, or it wasn't this whole big thing. And right, he talks about, I wanted to mention infants, right? In industrial France, he talks about the infant like infirmaries or like
yeah,
the
those
boxes
sad.
that they
They
had.
were like changeling houses,
Yeah, you could just like drop a
foundling
baby
houses.
off. Foundling, yeah.
Foundling. Yeah.
You just drop a baby off and then you didn't have to worry about it anymore. And like often they just died
Well,
there.
Most of these places had like close to 100% mortality rate for these infants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was I forget where I got that, but
That
I
was
guess
early on in the
nowadays-
book, right?
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But nowadays I guess I've just been thinking about the extent to which everything becomes like an expense or a commodity of some kind, and how kids now haven't been even made into something that's no longer like a gift or something, but it's like a ball and chain around, like because of the expenses that they bring with
Tax
them.
write-off.
You do get a tax write-off,
That's right.
but a
Hell
lot of the
yeah.
time it cripples people more, or they're thought of as a burden, and that just sort of makes me sad. Also, though, we should talk about how there were a lot more dead babies in prehistoric times. A little bit. Did you guys remember that part? Like about infanticide?
Right. Yeah. That just as that being a thing to control. Because I think they were talking in the book about our conflated sense of not only our life expectancy rates, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of a constantly given number that is just kind of based on faulty science. When you look at it, it's based more on actually like on the rate of infants reaching a certain age as opposed to
Well, it's a function of
people-
averages, right?
a function of
Basically.
averages based on infant mortality,
Right.
which isn't like at all a good signifier for average life expectancies of people.
or quality of life, or
Right, exactly.
so something they talked about is how babies in some like older cultures are not considered to be full humans. Like they're more on the level of animals and stuff. So whereas we have debates about like whether or not an embryo is like a full human, like a mother, like they talked to mothers in Brazil or something that where they said like it's pretty common for infanticide, where like
Mm-hmm.
women will just let babies die if the baby is weak, or like
And there's a
seems
lack
like
of
it-
resources.
Well,
And there's a lack,
If
yeah.
you're right, and if you have a small group like a band,
Right.
it's
yeah,
adding new people is going to be extremely
Difficult, not dangerous.
right. It's you're gonna have to get that much more my grammar's fucked this morning. You're gonna need that. You're gonna need more resources to provide for more people. So it's
Right.
not just like taking in another person. It's just this easy like, oh well, come join the group.
Mm-hmm.
It's they
Another damn mouth to feed.
Mhm.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, it's like the working assumption is that these groups they worked really, really hard to provide for everyone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? Like that's part of his argument, but his angle from it is that these forager bands were very, very egalitarian.
Like strictly so, like
Yeah.
enforced egalitarianism, because that's just what is necessary in order for everyone to survive.
Well, and also there isn't just opportunity for that much hierarchy because of the lack of resources again, right?
Right.
But
yeah,
that thing about it
and
being a cooperative thing is big, yeah.
yeah, it's huge. And going back to the infanticide real quick, it was like a fascinating study between what egalitarian small bands are willing to do in order to ensure the survival of everyone, but also another example of just how even the term child or infant, or as far as its consideration for humanity is concerned, is cultural as well.
That is a good point, Cooper. Yeah.
Which I will be the first to admit is like difficult to wrap my mind around, these like very ingrained cultural understandings that I have, and then to think of them being either inverted or otherwise like discarded when it comes to another culture that's difficult. Like I don't think I'm alone in saying like it is like a really strange and difficult thought experiment for me to think of like a child not being human until its naming day when it's like 18 months old.
Yeah.
I'm not like prescribing any sort of like judgment or value on that. This book is fun for if you do want to challenge some of your preconceived notions on something that you never thought you would question, which is
totally
basis of monogamy, basis of motherhood, childhood,
yes,
relationships.
I think it's still walking around acting like everything is one way or needs to be one way, or
right.
Everyone should be in the same box.
Especially like because we all seem to be like of the same sort of postmodernist emo boy ilk as far as like the books we pick, and if we're gonna go around saying nothing matters, then we should be able to like challenge what things we have that apparently don't matter, because people have difficulty doing that, right?
This book kind of caused an uproar when it came out, right? Like there was a lot of negative pressure.
Sure.
And I think
the
I
Baptists
love that because
probably hated
that's yeah. Well, what I love about that is like that's kind of a testament to its message, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
If it attacks these like basic assumptions and then everyone like starts freaking out about it, it's like, well, you must feel pretty vulnerable about that.
Right.
Right.
I mean, honestly, I was begrudging this pick a little bit, Phil. And I
thought it was some polyamory fucking shit.
Yeah, no, well, I just thought it'd be a lot more like opinion in your face, and I think the way it came off was actually really pleasant, and the way it revealed this information and was trying to engage with the reader. So I didn't feel attacked ever. Like I felt like it was like having a conversation about these topics.
Nice.
Whether or not I practice them with, the same as these authors or the same that they're talking about, it was nice to engage with these ideas and kind of play around with them and how they work in my own life, and and in modern life in general too.
Right.
I do have a paper due in little less than 2 hours, so I might have to get going here.
No.
That's fine. I think we're about done anyway.
For what class? I'm just curious.
It is for careers in wildlife biology. I have to write a quick essay for that.
Well, tell them that you're working on your career. Talking about books and sex and stuff.
One of us has to do that in this group.
Somebody does.
Yeah.
Anybody.
Well, let's go ahead and do. I think we've gone like 2 hours or more.
Oh yeah,
we see that.
Yeah, we have.
So
should we do closing remarks?
I think closing is great. Let's do it. Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It was a very fun, easy read, very informative, not just in challenging preconceived notions that I had, but like I said, I've had a lifelong fascination with the idea of primitive tribes, with the idea of studying other cultures, monkeys, chimps. Like, I love that. I don't want to, sorry for any monkey or ape nerd out there. I know that chimps are not monkeys. I'm so sorry. But this was super fun. It was super easy to read. Was of a level that I could understand, and if there were some certain terms or concepts I didn't understand, the authors were sure to explain to me exactly what they were getting at. It was really easy to access. That being said, like, I'm always curious whenever I'm being prescribed a new way to look at human evolution and how humans should live their lives. I will always be skeptical of that. And so this book begs me to look further into the research and to see what sort of rebuttals were made against it, to see what others had to say about it. And, you know, it's been over a decade since it was published. I'd be curious to see what other evidence suggests that what the authors wrote is true or not. I'm deeply fascinated with this topic, and I think this was like a really nice gateway into some pretty cool, heady stuff.
Nice. Let's see.
I can go next.
I think that makes sense, Dan.
We got to get better about this dead air stuff, you guys. There's
You're right.
We shouldn't have 30 seconds of silence.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, editor can work his magic.
I won't.
Yeah, but alphabetical, I think that's good.
I was reflecting on this book last night when I was drinking, and I wrote something, apparently. So for my closing, I'll just share that. Well, first, before I read that, I'll say I did really, really enjoy this book. I ended up reading it. I only read it in a few sessions. I felt like when I sat down with it, I could easily blow through 60, 70 pages at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just the way it's structured and the conversational tone and, you know, humorous tidbits and historical anecdotes. It's great. It's a lot of reasons to read this book.
Yes.
But Drunk Dan last night said, gotta love the angle of Darwin and the rest, bringing to the eye gazing through the microscope more than pure impartiality as their profession would rightly preach. They analyze the results from through their own cultural lens, incorporating their own values, etc. When science should be completely something. I can't read my handwriting.
Yeah,
but apparently I have
damn it, Dan! If I was there,
right? Yeah, Eric, you can read my handwriting better than I can. So yeah, if you were here, you could figure this shit out. But yeah, that will be my closing.
Oh, cool. Well, I'll go. So, like I said, I actually really enjoyed this book after begrudging it, and I think part of it was just how it was very engaging with the reader, and you know, I really loved learning about all like the differences and similarities between us and chimps and bonobos, which I wasn't very familiar with as a species of ape, anyway. So that was kind of fun to learn about, you know, those two close relatives to humans, and you know, about different tribes of people, like Cooper was saying earlier. I think all of that stuff, the anthropological side and the biological side of this book, or at least what they're attempting to do with it, like really engaged me a lot. So I think it's fun challenging perceptions for sure. Like, I think it's good to be uncomfortable when you read something and like really question.
Here.
Yeah. Well, cool. I'm glad you guys liked it. I was really fucking excited about this book when I read it the first time. I think it was the first time that I discovered the method of reading where like I was really excited about what I was reading, so I didn't want to stop. So when I had to go to work or something, I would just put it on the audiobook and pick up where I left off, and then I would come home and pick up reading or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I've since like incorporated that method of reading into my practice a little bit, but it's kind of funny. Oh shit! Sorry, someone came in here. Anyway, I was super excited about this. I think it's cool. I think the demolition analogy is a good one because it's this idea that it just clears this whole gap for things to kind of spring up. Like if you think of, right, I think there's a really Nietzschean aspect with this project about pushing down these big mono structures that have been in our culture, like this monotheistic idea, or in some senses, like in economics, like a mono capitalistic structure, or in agriculture, we have monoculture. And this was just another like monogamy, like this idea that's been propped up and doesn't seem to fit in a lot of ways. And so I think it really effectively like finds all the pillars and sorts them out and then demolishes them, kind of like a big tree that falls in the rainforest, and all of a sudden there's this big gap of sunlight that can spring up. And he talks about kind of new possibilities and directions of relationships once we start like incorporating this knowledge. You know, he kind of nods to polyamory a little bit and talks about how somebody else even describes, like, I think it's from the newspaper article or some article, that this triad seems to be replicating possible like relationship structures from ancient times, where you have like more of a little tribe unit thing. Yeah, and I like that. I think it's good to just question this stuff. It can, right? We even talked about how this stuff brings out insecurities and people spike up because of it. And I think it's really important to just examine where that stuff comes from and to see if it's like based in a good place or not. Because often it's just based in fear, right? Like there's a lot of abandonment stuff that's built into the standard narrative, or codependency stuff that's built into the standard narrative. And that stuff seems to prop up insecurities. And so what I like about this is that it kind of takes us down into some gritty places and makes us deal with some things. Like jealousy or whatever is a big one that comes up in like polyamory or whatever. He even mentions jealousy in this book. That was another term that he like complicated by saying it didn't have really wide applicable meaning. But I really like this book for all the complications it brings to science. And I'm always kind of mad that people are like treat science like a religion, and that like it's leading us someplace like to the promised land or something, and that it's flawless or objective, or and I think this book just does a really good job of showing how it has a fuckload of baggage a lot of the time, and is also not really that good at seeing outside of itself and kind of seeing new ways of how things are done. So that's a big long thing, but I could probably talk about this book for a long time. So thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you. This was a good one.
Yeah, this was a really good one, Phil.
And thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah.
Whoever's listening out.
Is it I think it's my choice next time, right?
It
Yeah,
is.
it's gonna be fun. It's
The Princess Bride by William Goldman,
which is basically like the whole romantic picture, I think.
Yeah. Isn't that the perfect book after we just demolished it all?
I think it's been a nice sequence with the
demolished
arguments.
demolish that iceberg, or
the Waste Books podcasts are a giant conversation.
But yeah, I think it'll be fun. A good switch up to like some fun fantasy, not silliness.
I love it. Remember to smash that like button. Follow us on Twitter, GoFundMe, Podbean, Indiegogo.
No, check out our Patreon. We haven't done a group plug for the Patreon yet.
Patreon.
Patreon. Send you things in the mail.
Lots of cool.
www.patreon.com/Cooper needs a new car, baby.
That's not it. No, it's Google Waste Division Patreon.
That's a different one, Coop. That was your Kickstarter.
That's the Kickstarter one.
Cooper's having a baby. Patreon.
That is real life. Give me money, please.
I'll send you. You'll send out pages of your journal as you descend into madness over having a kid.
I'll send you handfuls of my hair.
Tier. Yes, exactly. That'd be a good tier. Yeah, go subscribe. Be a patron on our Patreon. There's always really amazing, fantastic stuff from a lot of really talented, creative people, and you're really missing out if you're not having these things in your hand. It's really impressive to see what everybody puts together for those packages. So
monthly,
go over there and check it out.
Yeah,
it's 2 times a week we send you a package.
That's not it. Don't say that.
It's 2 times a day for 76 days straight. We send you stuff.
Once a month.
It's a once a month package, and the other stuff I said is very true. It's incredibly talented people who put stuff in there. So go and support that if you'd like.
Wastedivision.org, Waste Division Patreon. That's all.
Waste more
on Instagram,
Twitter, Podbean.
Oh, we have some news about Waste Radio that we will share soon. Yeah.
We do?
Little idea. Yep.
Cool.
Sorry.
I can't wait to
Important
find out what it
people
is.
only.
Yeah. Sorry, Dan. You weren't in that circle. Well, God damn it.
Did I leak it?
Yeah, it's a Dan, at least.
Oh, sorry.
Fuck.
All right, should we say bye?
Yeah. Thanks
All
for
right,
listening.
Bye.
Is this what we do at the end of our podcast? We all say bye?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do it. Adios.
Return
Bye.
our goodbye, Cooper. Yeah, there we go. Very good.
Bye. I guess we are saying goodbye to each other. All right, if that's the case, bye, guys. It was so good seeing you.
Cool.
Peace, fellas.
Well, that was good. Oh, Dan.
Yeah.
I do have to go.
Yeah, good. See you. Bye, Coop.
Bye, guys.
Dan. So,
Yes, sir.
Waste Radio. We're changing the appendix episodes to Waste Radio so that
That sounds better.
I'm going to go, guys.
2 separate podcasts.
Thanks, dude.
Okay.
And I have your brother recording a country tune for our intro. It's going to be a dusty, like AM radio